Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is April 1st. In this episode, we're traveling back to 1988 to the city of Fort Wayne, Indiana. It's a case that still sends chills down the spine of anyone who hears it. The abduction and murder of 8-year-old April Marie Tinsley. For decades, April's family and her community were left searching for answers. This story is not just about tragedy, but about the determination to bring justice even when the odds seem impossible. Today, we're going to talk about April Tinsley's life, the terrible crime against her, and the decades-long pursuit that finally led to justice. Let's get started. April Tinsley was the kind of child everyone remembers. She was the little girl with the bright smile and an even brighter spirit. She was just 8 years old, a second grader at Fairfield Elementary, and the youngest in her family. April loved the simple joys of childhood, riding her bike, playing with friends, and exploring the quiet streets of her Fort Wayne neighborhood. Family and friends recall her as sweet and outgoing. She had a playful energy and an innocence that made her beloved by classmates and neighbors alike. She wasn't just another child in the neighborhood. April was the kind of kid who left an impression. April 1st, 1988 was Good Friday, and despite the gray, drizzly weather, kids all over Fort Wayne were out enjoying the early spring break. And April was no different. She was outside playing with friends, soaking up the small freedom that kids enjoy when school lets out for a long weekend. Around 3 p.m., April decided to head home for a little bit because she wanted to grab her umbrella so that she could continue to play in the rain. Witnesses saw her walking along a route that she knew well through the familiar streets just blocks from her house on Hoagland Avenue. But then she vanished. When April didn't return to her friends or make it home, her family's concern quickly turned to panic. Her mother wasted no time and called the police by that evening. Before long, neighbors joined law enforcement, searching every alley, field, and wooded patch in the neighborhood. They called her name, hoping for a response and clinging to the belief that she'd just wandered off or gotten lost somehow. But as the hours passed without any sign of April, hope was replaced by a growing sense of dread. 3 long, gut-wrenching days passed with no word. Then, on April 4th, the worst fears of April's family and community came true. A jogger running along a quiet rural road near Spencerville, about 20 miles northeast of Fort Wayne, made a heartbreaking discovery. Hidden in a shallow ditch, partially obscured by debris, was the lifeless body of April Marie Tinsley. Detectives and forensic teams were on the scene almost immediately, carefully documenting every detail. What they found was devastating. April had been sexually assaulted and strangled. Beside her body were horrifying pieces of evidence. One of her shoes, and a plastic shopping bag containing condoms and a sex toy. These items would later become critical in piecing together the puzzle of who had committed this horrific crime. Even worse, the medical examiner determined that April had likely been held captive for 1 to 2 agonizing days before she was murdered. Knowing this, that she endured such fear and suffering, was a crushing blow to not only her family, but the entire Fort Wayne community. The location where she was found was remote. It was tucked away in the back roads of Allen and DeKalb counties. Investigators knew immediately that whoever had done this was someone who knew the area well. As word spread, the city of Fort Wayne was engulfed in grief. Candlelight vigils were held, neighbors hugged their children a little bit tighter, and April's family tried to make sense of an unspeakable loss. And beneath the sorrow, there was still fear, because April's killer was still out there. And just when the case seemed like it couldn't get any more chilling, it did. In 1990, 2 years after April's murder, the community was rocked again. A crude message written in crayon was discovered scrawled on the side of a barn in St. Joseph Township, just miles from where April's body had been found. It read, quote, "I kill 8-year-old April Marie Tinsley. Did you find the other shoe? Ha ha, I will kill again." End quote. It was like a nightmare that refused to end. The message wasn't some cruel hoax. The detail about the missing shoe was something that was only known to police and April's killer. It became clear that the person responsible was not only still out there, but was deliberately taunting both law enforcement and the community. Despite renewed urgency, the investigation still stalled. Then, in 2004, nearly 2 decades after April's murder, the killer struck again. But this time it was with words, not violence. Several young girls, and this is just so disgusting. Several young girls around Fort Wayne found notes left for them. Some slipped into mailboxes, others tied to their bikes. And these weren't innocent letters. They were horrifying. The notes were handwritten, claiming responsibility for April's murder and warning that the killer could strike again. Along with the notes were used condoms and, in some cases, disturbing Polaroid pictures. Forensic testing confirmed what everyone feared. DNA from the 2004 taunts matched the DNA from April's crime scene. Whoever had killed April was the same person terrorizing the community now. Despite this crucial link, though, the killer remained unidentified. Families in Fort Wayne had to just live with the knowledge that April's killer had never been caught and was still nearby, watching. By 2018, the case was still technically unsolved, but it had never been forgotten. Certainly not by April's family and not by law enforcement either. After 30 years of dead ends, detectives decided to try something that had just recently started making headlines in the criminal justice world: forensic genealogy. Using GEDmatch, a public DNA database, forensic experts uploaded the killer's DNA profile, hoping for a familial match. And they got one. With the help of renowned forensic genealogist C.C. Moore and the team at Parabon Nanolabs, investigators painstakingly built a family tree tracing connections from distant relatives until they zeroed in on 2 brothers living near Fort Wayne. One name stood out: John D. Miller, a lifelong resident of Grable, Indiana, just a short drive from where April had been abducted and later found. To confirm their suspicions, investigators discreetly collected Miller's discarded trash, obtaining items that they could test for DNA. The results were undeniable. The DNA was a match, not just from the crime scene in 1988, but also to those horrifying notes left in 2004. After 30 agonizing years, April's killer finally had a name. On July 15th, 2018, detectives knocked on the door of John D. Miller's modest trailer home in Grable, Indiana. When asked if he knew why they were there, Miller chillingly replied, quote, "April Tinsley," end quote. He was then taken into custody, where he waived his Miranda rights and began to speak, calmly and without remorse. He confessed to everything. He told investigators how, on April 1st, 1988, he abducted April as she walked near his home. He took her to his trailer, where he sexually assaulted her. Then, the following day, overwhelmed by fear of getting caught, he strangled April and dumped her body along a remote road in DeKalb County. Miller also admitted to the taunting notes, the barn graffiti in 1990, and the terrifying letters left for young girls in 2004. He explained that he felt compelled to taunt the police and the community. His confession aligned perfectly with the DNA evidence collected over the years, and it confirmed that the man who had haunted Fort Wayne for decades was finally behind bars. Investigators were stunned by Miller's detached demeanor. He recounted these events without any visible emotion, which only deepened the horror of the situation for those who were in the room. For April's family and the Fort Wayne community, this arrest marked the long-awaited end of a nightmare. But it, of course, could never undo the pain of what this man did. Rather than endure a lengthy trial, John D. Miller pleaded guilty as part of a plea deal. On December 7th, 2018, standing before John F. Surbeck Jr. in Allen Superior Court, Miller admitted to abducting, sexually assaulting, and murdering April Marie Tinsley. He showed no visible emotion as he detailed his unspeakable acts. During sentencing, April's family gave powerful victim impact statements. They spoke through tears about the little girl they had lost, the joyful child who loved riding her bike, playing with friends, and bringing happiness to everyone she met. They shared how April's murder had stolen not only her life, but their sense of security, and how it forced them to live in pain and fear for 30 years. Judge Surbeck sentenced Miller to 80 years in prison, 50 years for murder, and 30 years for child molestation, to be served consecutively. Given Miller's age, this sentence effectively ensured that he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. He is currently incarcerated at the Newcastle Correctional Facility in Indiana. Although justice was finally served, April's family and the community in Fort Wayne were left with the reality that no sentence could fix what had been done. But at least there was solace in knowing that the man who had terrorized them was no longer free. April's case became one of the most notable early successes of forensic genealogy and really proved its power in solving these cold cases. Law enforcement agencies across the country took notice and have started to adopt this technique to bring resolution to other long unsolved cold cases, many of which we've already talked about on this podcast. But beyond the forensic significance of her case, in Fort Wayne, April is remembered not only as a victim, but as a bright, kind, and beloved child whose life left a lasting impact. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found April's story as moving and important as I did, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!